Africa Check has looked into the Democratic Alliance's claims and their rescue plan for South Africa. The opposition party launched its election manifesto on February 17 and says it will save South Africans from unemployment, the energy and water crises, crime, poverty, failing services and poor education, as well as health systems. In setting out the issues the country faces in these areas, the DA made several claims. Well, let's speak to researcher Keegan Leech, who has fact-checked some of these. Keegan, appreciate your time. Just give us an overview. Well, in fact, let's start with the assertion that 151 municipalities are on the brink of financial collapse and 43 have already collapsed. Is that accurate based on the data provided by Treasury and the Auditor General?
Yes, this is accurate. This is exactly what Treasury said at the end of 2022. And while the Auditor General uses slightly different terms and makes slightly different or comes to slightly different findings because it's using slightly different categorizations, the figures are about the same and the findings are about the same. A lot of South Africa's municipalities have less money than they need to pay their creditors.
So how might the DA's characterization of the municipal financial crisis influence public perception of the ruling party and the party's management of local government?
Well, the DA has included this claim pretty explicitly as a criticism of the ruling party. It says, it argues in its manifesto that this failure of many municipalities is due to cadre deployment, which I'm sure we're used to hearing the DA talk about. And so it's included this as a way to very explicitly call out what it thinks the ruling party is doing wrong and what it wants to correct should it be elected.
Well, one of the other issues that the DA spoke about is unemployment of young people. And there seems to be a bit of a discrepancy there.
Yeah, the DA said that about a third of working age people are unemployed and or are out of jobs. And the unemployment rate in South Africa is just over 30%, so it's about a third, but that isn't the same as all working age people. If we're talking about all working age people who have jobs, what we should be using is something called the absorption rate, by which only about 40% of working age South Africans have a job. And there are many other, there are many reasons why some of those people who don't have a job are not counted as unemployed. And they might be studying, they might just not be looking for work. But it means that there's a bit of a discrepancy between what the DA has said and the kinds of information that it should actually be presenting. Even if it just wants to talk about unemployment, then there is an expanded unemployment rate, which is about 10% higher than the DA has suggested.
So let's talk about issues around deliberate peddling of information, which might be deemed misinformation versus just an inability, for instance, possibly by the DA to collect the most accurate information. How critical are these issues?
So it's actually very difficult when assessing any kind of false information to assess the motive, essentially. We make a distinction between misinformation, which is false information that's shared unintentionally, and disinformation, which is false information that's shared intentionally by someone who knows it's false, maybe because they want to achieve a political end or make some money or something like that. And it is very often impossible to tell the two apart. So for our purposes, we very often can't and very often don't distinguish between the two. What is important here is really that whatever the motivation behind sharing claims is, and whatever sort of kind of impetus there is behind it, we should be ensuring that our political parties are accurate. We want neither a situation where a political party is deliberately misinforming the public, or a situation where a political party is, through their own failings, just not getting the facts right, even if they're trying to. We want them to be sharing information that is as accurate as possible because that shows that they are in touch with what's actually happening in the country.
So, Keegan, do you have a statistic that measures the implication of figures that aren't accurate, right? So understandably, in many instances, information isn't available, so there are deductions that are made, extrapolations that are made to come up with certain numbers, and in coming up with those numbers, I suppose manifestos are then affected. Do you have a stat that suggests just the implications of information that isn't 100% accurate, or that is that lacks 5, 10, or 15% of the truth, if you will?
I don't have, I suppose, a single stat that I can give you to respond to that, but it is pretty clear how important accurate information is. And you're absolutely right to say that in many cases we can't get to a perfectly accurate number. We have to make estimates or draw conclusions from what information that we do have. And it helps in those cases to be clear about what's happening. If if you as a journalist or a politician or something like that are sharing something that is an estimate, it is important to say this is an estimate. This is a conclusion that we've drawn from the data available. And we find that professionals, researchers, scientists very often do share something that is an estimate and not an exact number. But part of being good at those sorts of jobs is being clear about how those estimates work. So, for example, when it comes to health claims, you will very rarely find a scientific publication that says we studied the effects of this drug and it just 100% does or 100% doesn't work. They make claims based on research and that they've done, and that research is incomplete by its nature. You can't test everyone in the world. So they present findings that are estimates with a range of possibility, and then they try and make it clear whether that range is an acceptable one for the finding that they have come to.
So it all brings into question now the DA's or the implications of the DA's claim, so that South Africa experienced the highest annual murder rate in record between April 2022 and March of last year, despite data suggesting otherwise.
Yeah, this is a claim that the DA did mostly accurately report the number of murders in that time period, and it is quite high. The murder rate has been rising over the last several years, but they're incorrect to say that it's the highest in our history. The peak was probably somewhere around 1993, and it was much higher than today's murder rate. Today's is somewhere around 45 murders per 100,000 people. In the 90s, it was, one expert told us, estimated to be in the 70s, 80s, or even 90s of number of murders per 100,000 people. So that could be a double-sized murder rate. And it shows a little
Keegan,
bit of carelessness.
You speak about an expert saying that the murder rate in the early 90s or late 80s could have been double what the DA have suggested, and this is based on information from an expert. Is there no way else to get this information? I mean, I think one of the things that we've been talking about regarding AfriCheck is the veracity of the information that is given. So where would I, for instance, find this information? So we've just said that the DA gave us a number in which they said that the highest murder rates were between April 2022 and March of last year, and these aren't actually the highest numbers. Where would I then go to verify and confirm that this indeed are the actual numbers?
Well, what we did is we went to experts at the Institute for Security Studies, and the expert I just quoted here, Anine Kriegler, was an expert at that organization, and they helped us to find other, older data and helped explain the topic and make sure that we weren't missing anything. And we also heavily relied on a 2019 study conducted by the United Nations, which looked at the murder rate over time in South Africa and found that a high murder rate is not a post-apartheid phenomenon, that actually our murder rate was extremely high in 1993 and in the early 90s generally, and that it remaining high is not something that is a special case of post-apartheid South Africa, that we actually have a history of a very high murder rate. And you can find that linked on our website, so we always quote experts by name, we link to the organizations and the research that we have consulted. And if you wanted to do this for yourself and you didn't want to, go to our website first, if maybe we hadn't checked a claim that you wanted to look up, then we recommend not just doing a quick Google search and looking at the first result, making sure that you know the source of every claim that you are looking at and every piece of data, making sure that it's the most recent available and that it was published by a reliable organization.
Finally, let's take a look at the implications of the DA's claim that load shedding costs the economy $300 billion and cut GDP projections by 5%, considering some of those challenges in accurately quantifying the economic impact of power outages.
This is a really difficult claim to evaluate, and it's also a good one to talk about our research process and how we make sure that we're using accurate information. We've rated this mostly correct because while this is difficult to evaluate, the DA did rely on some of the most recent and most rigorous research available. It quoted some studies done by the Bureau for Economic Research at Stellenbosch, and we spoke to the people who conducted that research, and they told us that actually this is one of those cases where we are making estimates based on relatively incomplete information and coming to the best estimate that we possibly can. So the DA's claim is a little bit out of date, and we can't be perfectly exact. That might not be the figure if we were to do a similar cost estimate for 2023 or at the end of 2024. And it doesn't factor in a lot of things. It doesn't factor in, for example, the impacts of load shedding on investment in the country and how that might alter GDP. But it is the best information that we have available based on what's called cost of unserved energy, an impact on GDP that is estimated for every kilowatt hour of electricity that's not available.